You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. The shockwaves caused by the shooting of Timothy Thomas last April by the then Cincinnati police officer Stephen Roach continue to churn through the region. Beyond Cincinnati proper, no community has been so immediately caught up in this drama as the village of Evendale. Ever since the village leadership announced on January the 4th that it would hire Roach, Evendale has been divided. Led by African Americans, some residents have appealed to the mayor and the council not to go through with the hiring. After Roach started on the job, January the 22nd, they have sought to reverse the decision. One proposal has been to put the matter to the voters on a ballot. The village has refused, arguing that personnel decisions are not subject to popular review. On April the 14th, residents formally sued to get the issue on the ballot. On April the 17th, the concerned citizens of Evendale formally filed a suit asking Ohio courts to force the village to put the issue on the ballot this year.
Stake here, we believe, is democracy as we understand it, namely the ability of persons who live in a community to have some input and say in the important affairs of that community.
I am joined this morning by two residents of Evendale, Mary Weertz and Pam Meyers, both of whom are active with the Concerned Citizens organization. Welcome to Newsmakers. You and I have just met in the last 5 minutes, and I have to say, I think some of the viewers will be surprised that neither of you are African American. Does this indicate that the Concerned Citizens organization is not just an African American group, obviously?
No, it is not just an African American group. It's lots of residents, a diverse group, many of them white, because that is the majority in our town.
And what do you know what the percentage or how the community breaks out in terms of, I mean, this is a suburban community, but there is a significant African American population there. It's not just a white community with a few African Americans, but do you know sort of the breakout?
I think it's about 300 African Americans.
Which is about 10%?
Which is about 10%. There's 3,000 total and about 300 African Americans.
And a lot of other ethnic groups as well.
Okay. And Pam, has the fact, once you know, there was a decision to hire, there was the initial opposition, then he started work, and then the chief of Cincinnati, Stryker, made his presentation to the council, sort of laying out the police judgment that what he did back on April the 7th was wrong in a number of ways. Has that changed the momentum in the community and for the concerned groups, Pam?
I believe so. I think a lot of people did not have the facts of the situation and weren't really aware of what had happened and the various statements that Officer Roach had made. And once the Stryker report came out and that got a lot of publicity, people were more aware of the inconsistencies that he had expressed and what went on and why there were so many people back in January who were so concerned about this hiring.
When did, and I have to just ask this on a personal level, Mary, when did you get concerned about this?
I read about it in the paper, like everyone else in Cincinnati.
Back in January?
Back in January when he was hired. That's when we heard about it. This was done under an emergency ordinance, and so none of the residents knew of this except the council people and the mayor knew of this hiring. So we pretty much found out then, all surprised, and that's when I knew about it and heard about it. And
were you immediately upset by this?
I was concerned. Immediately I thought, why would we do this? Why would we jump into this? And how could this, why would they pick this candidate? Of all the candidates, why would they choose someone so questionable right now? Why wouldn't they wait to see about these investigations,
Pam,
the outcomes?
One of the arguments on that, and I have to say that I have invited a number of times representatives from Sharonville, the official Sharonville government, to be guests on the show, and they've declined. So, you know, that's, but and I'm not trying for you to have you answer for them, but why do you think they made, what's the consensus in the community? What's the attitude in the community about why they did go ahead with this and why they stick to it. Pam?
Well, they officially say that they interviewed him and went through the hiring process with him and about 30 other candidates, and after that process that they determined he was the best candidate available.
Does best mean that they had to hire the top candidate? Because there is a subjective element to that.
So much of it is subjective. I think about 14% of it was a written test, and the other, more than 85%, was really a personal evaluation, mostly done by, I think, a group of about 6 police.
The police chief and 5 police officers. But he, let's be clear, he did not score the highest. And there is no mandate in our town that you have to hire the highest, the person who scored the highest. So he did not score the highest.
At this point in time, what do you, as an organization, want to have happen?
We want to see him leave our town. It's so divisive now, and people are very upset. We're a small community. We live together. This is something that's bigger than us, and it's people are angry and upset, and it's.
Are they angry and upset with each other? Has this somehow ruined neighbor-to-neighbor relations?
Yes, it has.
It has affected it very much.
And I think a lot of people are they're angry with things that are happening in the city. And so their anger about what's happening downtown is coming to us, and now they're angry, with this, and so they may be supporting him because they're angry at what's happening downtown and with the boycott, and that's not what this is about. This is about finding the best candidate for our village, and not about getting involved in all of this. He was not the best candidate, and we need to go back to that. This is what this issue is about.
Now, my understanding is that you would like to see this on the ballot. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And would you be hoping to have this on the ballot in November or a special election before that?
No,
November. In November, because that is the procedure that is set forth in our Constitution, that if you have a problem with an ordinance, and he was hired under an emergency ordinance, that your recourse is to get a referendum, and a lot of us went around the community and asked people to sign a petition for that, and we got over 200 signatures.
Let me just throw this out as a hypothetical. None of us know what would happen. First off, we don't know if it would get on the ballot because the courts have to decide whether personnel issues, as it's defined by the city itself, can either go on a ballot. Okay, let's say it makes it to the ballot in November. Hypothetical, the vote is held, and a majority votes not to remove him, not to reverse this decision. What does your group do then?
I think we'll still be concerned, because for me it's always been an issue of right and wrong, and sometimes you can't decide right and wrong issues by majority vote. This is our only recourse because our village will not sit down with us. We have yet in 4 months been able to talk to our mayor or our councilman. They will not open this up to an open forum for discussion.
What does that mean, though? Because I know, and I certainly wasn't a reporter out there, but I saw on our air and I read in the newspaper how there were meetings with the mayor and council people and citizens. Weren't those
are regular monthly council meetings, and you have any citizen can sign up, and you have 3 minutes, and you are able to stand up in front of council and say your 3-minute speech, but there's no dialogue. And that's really what we need in this situation, is to sit down at a table and have dialogue and settle this and finish it.
Pam, I got to say that for those of us who've been around Cincinnati politics for a long time, hear that same thing about city council. You're only allowed to go in, and there it's only 2 minutes, and it gets to be a mess and all of that. But even in a small community like Evendale, it's not possible just to have people gather at a church. Even if it's not under the official sanction, there haven't been chances for people just to sit down and work this out?
Well, we have tried to do that. Certainly, council and the police chief have met several times with Officer Roach and his representative, but they haven't been willing to do that with us. When the hiring announcement was first made, because of the reaction, Evendale sent out a letter to everyone saying that they would meet in groups of 20 twice a week until they saw everybody.
I think that's what I remember, yeah.
Yes, and then I believe they had 2 meetings, and then they canceled it and said, well, this decision's been made and we need to move on. And the next communication I got from our mayor was that we need to move on, this decision has been made. And a lot of us feel that, no, we're not ready to move on, we shouldn't have to move on.
Is there any indication that inside the official leadership, the elected leadership, that there's any split on this? I mean, okay, the mayor has been out front, and the police chief, he's not elected, obviously, but I don't have any sense of how the council falls out in Evendale. Is there any sense that some want to go one way and some want to go the other? Mary?
We have no idea. We have no idea where anyone is. They are standing as a block. They will not discuss it with us. In the latest situation where they have taken, the police chief has taken Roach off the streets,
Right.
we are not, they are told by their attorney they are not allowed to speak to any resident about this issue. So now we can't even speak to them at all. So no, we don't know where they're at. We
And
haven't been
again,
able to
this
talk
is
to them.
this isn't a question I probably can legitimately ask you to answer, but I've got to put it out there. When he was taken off the street after the Stryker report, what Evendale officially said was that he had until next January to clear his name. Any idea what that means? How does a person in this situation clear their name?
We don't know. We have tried to find out what the standards would be.
We've written a letter from the
yeah.
concerned citizens to the mayor and council asking for a definition of that and to please respond to us so that we can know what to do, what our next step should be, and we haven't gotten any response. So no one really knows what is happening.
We only have about 30 seconds. How many people are in your organization, and how many people do you think, not necessarily in the organization, but maybe support this perspective?
I think there's hundreds of people that support this. We have over 200 on a petition, but there's hundreds of people, and now since the Stryker report, there are more, but this is a situation where a lot of people want it to go away. They don't want to deal with this with their neighbors. They don't want to get into racial issues with their neighbors. They want to live peacefully, and so they're not going to be out on the front line with this, but in their home and over their backyard fence, they're saying, hey, let's get rid of this.
So even though there aren't official meetings, there's a lot of talking.
There may not be, there's a lot of talking.
Well, you have to wonder why they were protesting the referendum so strongly.
I have to wrap this up, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. After the break, a discussion with the new force for improving the schools in Cincinnati. Welcome back. Year in and year out, in a wide variety of polls, Americans consistently identify the quality of education as their #1 priority. In the last 4 years, relatively quietly, a major new force for the improvement of education in Ohio has emerged. KnowledgeWorks Foundation was formed in 1998 out of the assets of the Student Loan Funding Corporation. Currently, KnowledgeWorks has over $200 million in assets, making it Ohio's largest philanthropy devoted to public education. The foundation's areas of focus include ensuring universal access to post-secondary education for all Ohio students, assistance to local districts to help them plan to use the nearly $23 billion that state and local governments expect to spend on the construction and renovation of school facilities over the next 12 years, ensure that children in substitute care, foster care, kinship care, receive the needed education that they need, a special focus on early childhood education, and support programs to train low-wage workers. In February, the foundation released the results of its second statewide poll on education and explores the attitudes of Ohioans about what they want and expect from public education. And several weeks ago, the foundation announced that it would team up with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, pretty good partner, to invest over $31 million to reform urban high school education. To discuss KnowledgeWorks, I am joined by Chad Wick, who has been president and CEO of KnowledgeWorks since its founding in 1998, and by Harold Brown, the director of access programs, is that right, for KnowledgeWorks Foundation. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you very much, Dan.
How unusual is KnowledgeWorks? Is as I understand it, it's, as I just stated, largest in Ohio. Is it, when you look at this nationally, have we got a pretty unique resource here?
Well, we're not unique nationally. We are unique in Ohio. Ohio does not have any statewide foundations. We've got wonderful community foundations. We've got some local philanthropies that play a key role in their communities. But for some reason, philanthropy in Ohio has never been blessed with having a foundation play a statewide role, and that's the unique role that KnowledgeWorks Foundation is playing. Other states like Illinois, Indiana, virtually every state around us, they have their Kellogg foundations, their MacArthur foundations, their Pews and Kellogg's and so forth. And Lilly, exactly. And the advantage these foundations have had to the states is they can take the big picture view. They can make connections that sort of transcend social and policy barriers because they're really trying to look for the best things that work usually. And we haven't had that in Ohio. So we're finding ourselves playing a very important and valued role.
Harold, so frequently on this show, we focus on the greater Cincinnati region. But as Chad just said, you're looking at a much larger picture. How would you evaluate the quality, the state, the momentum, the direction of public education in Ohio right now?
Well, I think the reputation in the greater public's minds is not very good. But we know from working with the Ohio Department of Education, working with various cities and districts around the state, that there's great improvement underway. And we seek to bring to bear throughout Ohio the best practices and the best information and research that can help that improvement and further that improvement.
You know, one of the there's a lot of interesting things on the survey, but one of the things that really jumped out at me was that people don't necessarily have good information about education. People were not, when you asked them, they didn't really know what it cost to educate a student in a secondary school situation or a primary school situation. They didn't understand what it cost to go to college. Is that true? Were you surprised by those results, Chad?
Well, yes, we were. I mean, the poll is meant to be a scorecard, so we know how we're doing as a state for policymakers, for school leaders. How does the public feel? After all, the public education is very much in the interest of the public, and so how do they really feel? And we were surprised. Take, for instance, the one item you cited, the cost of higher education. So Ohioans overestimate the cost of college education by double what it actually costs. And that's not mixing apples and oranges, room and board. That's tuition to tuition. And
so in your survey, what did you find that people thought it cost?
They think it costs about a little under $12,000 a year, and in reality it's about half that in Ohio from Ohio public colleges and universities. What that means, the implication is that many parents who are first generation would have first-generation college-going students may not influence their kids to do well in school because they don't perceive they can afford college. And if you don't, at these very early ages, create a mindset or a hope, a vision, aspirations that college is possible, and I'm going to encourage you, and you're going to do your homework and be mindful of your responsibilities, then, you know, you get down into the later years in high school and it's too late.
And in fact, if a parent doesn't think they can ever afford to send their students to college, I mean, you can say that they don't encourage them. Can it actually go the other way, where they actually discourage, so that, I mean, can it have a truly negative effect?
Absolutely. In fact, I've heard stories where parents have actually criticized and confronted some people that work in college access, and they've said, don't create those hopes in my kids because I don't think I can afford it, and I don't want to disappoint them when the time comes. So yes, it can work in reverse.
You know, one of the interesting things, and I want to put the results of one of the poll questions up on the screen because I found it really interesting, and that was you asked people a question about, as they're figuring out how to build these new schools, about the building of community schools and turning schools into facilities that could be not only used during the day to teach children, but to be used in the evening as health centers, as adult education centers, and all of these things. And it really is kind of interesting. The figures are kind of interesting when you see that. 84% support after-hours use of those facilities, and that when you get that kind of support, what it changes is support for levies goes from 43.4% to 63.2%. That's amazing to me. Are those the kinds of, and we just put up a figure that said they're willing to pay extra taxes as well, which is important and relates to that levy thing. Is that the sort of thing that's going on in places like Cincinnati or in places like Westchester that are building new buildings and designing them differently than they used to?
Very much so, Dan. In fact, this historic meeting we had between City Council and Cincinnati School Board just a couple of weeks ago, a big part of that is this notion of creating community schools, and by that we mean the integrated use of community services in the schools. Dan, the reality is 100 years ago when our schools were created, the model that created American public schools was really based on the need that we were growing into this era of high employment in industry, and we needed to push out a lot of people who would have enough skills to be effective. So we created really what educators call factory model schools. And while we've tinkered with that, modified it, essentially that 100-year-old model really hasn't changed. We put kids in the front door, we kind of run them on a conveyor belt about every 45 minutes to a different class. Teacher stamps them, pops them out the door at the end of 12 years, and we think, back then the notion was that only about 5% were to be expected to do thinking type work. The rest were to be essentially skilled or laborers. That isn't the world we're in now. Now we need about 70% of our people to do thinking kinds of work. Well, and so we need to really rethink the whole shape. What does and what should a public school look like? Well, part of what public is realizing is it's more than just the education. It really serves a broader lifelong learning now need of the community, and why can't the school play that role?
Harold, it's one thing to redesign the physical structure of a building, and when we talk about new buildings, that's what everybody gets focused on. How many classrooms, what are they going to look like, what's the open space, and all of that. But if we're talking about them being these community centers where adults are going to come in the evening for services of all different kinds, that's also a different way of thinking about what we've traditionally called curriculum and breaking up the 45-minute pod and all of that kind of stuff. Are there people thinking about how to use those buildings, not just redesign them differently, but use them differently?
Absolutely. Across the country and now in Ohio, they are thinking more comprehensively about community needs so that the school becomes a health service center, or it allows senior citizens groups to meet there and other kinds of activities that are needed by that community. And so what we've supported for quite a while now is the process of community engagement, of people in the community, all the stakeholders coming together and deciding what the community needs are and then how that school can be used to meet those needs.
Okay. One of the interesting things we've got to get out here is the whole question of the partnership with the Gates Foundation. $30.5 million basically is what you're pooling together.
Actually, it's closer to $35 million.
Okay,
Yeah.
That level I lose track. But seriously, what's that about? What's the goal of putting that kind of resource together?
I'll let Harold talk about some of the specifics, but just in a broad sense, if I can pick up on my earlier comment about the restructuring of the American public school, and particularly the high school, when it's all supposed to come together in those 4 years so that kids are indeed prepared, and now we say prepared to meet state standards because it's in the law, and be ready to graduate and pursue post-secondary education or a successful life where they have choices and can have a fulfilling life. The Gates Initiative, the Gates Foundation has really looked a lot at American education, and they believe the biggest, toughest problem there is the American high school. It's the most intractable problem we have, and it's where so many of the pathologies that kids bring to the school these days, all of that lumped together, low family involvement in education, a lot of social problems that ultimately, when kids get to high school, many are dropping out now. And so what this initiative will do is reshape high schools so that they go back to being small, personalized learning environments.
Yeah, I have less than about 30 seconds. Can you give me a couple specifics, Harold, about that real quick?
Sure. We're going to be working with a number of urban districts around the state to redesign their large dysfunctional high schools and to build new small high schools in urban areas. Research is showing clearly that smaller is better. So.
Small What size are we talking? What do people think is the right size?
We're hopeful for about 100 students per class.
Per grade level.
Per grade level, I'm sorry,
Okay,
per grade
and
level.
so 100. So a total in a 4-year high school of about 400.
400 in a new small school, but about 400 per learning academy within a larger high school.
Okay, and that's what we're seeing some of in Cincinnati,
Yes,
right?
we are.
Okay.
Yes.
Very complex subject. I think we got it out on the table, at least initially. KnowledgeWorks is doing a lot of interesting things. Thanks for being here. Obviously, you're going to be back here many times in the years to come.
Yeah, we hope so.
And thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next Sunday to meet the men and the women working to shape our region for the future. Have a good week.